I'm Luke Storey. For the past 22 years, I've been relentlessly committed to my deepest passion, designing the ultimate lifestyle based on the most powerful principles of spirituality, health, psychology, and personal development. The Life Stylist Podcast is a show dedicated to sharing my discoveries and the experts behind them with you. Zuby, we made it, dude.
We're here, man. Happy to be here.
I'm so stoked that you came through Texas.
Yeah, me too, man. I'm hyped.
Yeah, I saw that you were speaking at the event the other night with JP Sears and a couple other folks. And I was like, oh man, I got to hit him up. Because I don't really reach out to people that live super far away typically, because you just get a different vibe in person. And so I was like, he's here, man. So thanks for agreeing to do the show.
No doubt, man. Happy to be here. Appreciate the invite.
So tell me what it's been like to be in the U.S.
Amazing. It's been, I keep using the term, and it's not a term I usually use. I have been saying it's a love fest. Every city I've been to, all the events I've done, people I've met, it's just been love. Hundreds of people. Last time I was in the States was 2 years ago, September to November 2019. And in that 2 years, the sheer amount of growth and number of people who know me and are following, and I'm even just simply aware who I am, has gone up exponentially. Every single city, it's just been love, from the event on Friday to, when I first came into the States, I flew into Houston, spoke at the Young America's Foundation annual student conference to several hundred people in Houston, which was incredible. Then I went to Orlando and did a similar event for Young Americans for Liberty. Also amazing. I've done meetups in a couple different cities. Just the other day, went on the Joe Rogan podcast, done a bunch of other big podcasts, et cetera. And honestly, it's just been love everywhere. I've met so many great people, so many people who really appreciate what I'm putting out there, from my music to my tweets to my podcast to my general message to my book. It's just amazing, man. It's amazing. I feel really, really welcomed. I feel very happy. I feel very loved. There's a lot of opportunities. And I also just feel free. I feel free. Yeah. The past year and a half has been very, very weird, especially in a lot of places. And Texas and Florida actually are two of the sanest places in the entire world over this thing, and even right now. And coming from the UK and from other European countries, it's just good to just see people being normal again and not seeing masks everywhere and people doing this weird distancing thing and elbow bumping nonsense and just living in fear 24/7. It's just nice to just be back and see people being normal.
It's interesting because, and I agree, and welcome.
Thank you.
It's interesting because there's a large portion, well, I don't know how large they are actually, maybe they're just louder, but there's a subsect of people in this country that look at people in Florida and Texas as some sort of, viral vectors, super spreaders, and that we're all crazy.
They're sitting there waiting for everyone here to die, and seemingly being disappointed that refuses to happen.
We're still here, many of us, but it's just really interesting right now how you have the same objective reality happening. Yet there are groups of people, and we're going to talk about how to hopefully unite these groups of people. You talked a lot about that the other night, which I thought was so powerful. You have these groups of people that just see things in such an opposite perspective. It's crazy. I mean, it's astonishing to me that human beings in one country, which, of course is diverse in culture and thought, but generally we're all kind of Americans, you know what I mean? And you have people that, like, every once in a while, I kind of get out of my echo chamber. I'm not like a big Twitter user. I have like -0 followers there, but that's where I kind of get my news and see what's going on. And sometimes I'll sort of go to the other side just to see what people that aren't in my sphere or people that I agree with are saying. And I'm like, oh my God, like, we are so far apart in terms of our perspective on things like that. And I'm in a bubble here, and I only really experience it sometimes when I go to downtown Austin or, areas that are, I guess, not classically liberal, but what is now referred to as liberal. And I'm just like, whoa, we're living in a different universe. It's insane.
Yeah. And that point you make there is so fascinating because you use the term liberal. right? And firstly, it's a shame that this thing has become as politicized and tribal as it has become. But also what's interesting beyond the USA on a global level, on a national level, and on a state-by-state level here is that the people who tend to call themselves liberal have had the most illiberal approach to this in many cases. They've actually essentially become ultra hyper conservatives, which is really fascinating, even on a country level, right? If you look at the New Zealands, Australia, Canada, countries that are considered liberal and progressive, et cetera, and all of a sudden they've got the most extreme border policies, they've got the most extreme lockdowns, most authoritarian mandates, telling people what to do, telling people this, that. They've gone full-blown authoritarian. If you compare the Texases and Floridas and Georgias and South Dakotas to the Californias and the New Yorks, et cetera, it's mind-blowing because people use that term liberal, but the term liberal stems from liberty. It's freedom, right? So in a normal world, when words actually meant something, you would have been shocked to see that people who call themselves liberal are, in many cases, not all cases, but in many cases are advocating for the least liberal approach to this thing, which is it doesn't surprise me in a way because I think the word has become very unmoored from its original definition to the point that classical liberal actually means something very different to what people understand as liberal now. But it's a weird one, but you're totally right. People are inhabiting entirely different realities, essentially. We're all dealing with the same threats. I mean, at this point, I think the actual threat is very, very low, but this whole, it's the same virus, like on a global level, on a national level, on a state to state level. And you've got places that are literally 100% just totally normal, like just 2019, 2018 normal. And you've got other places which have, if you look at Australia, it's essentially a police state now. It's a prison colony. It's an authoritarian regime. You can't come, you can't go outside, can't go 3 kilometers from your house or whatever it is, can't see friends, can't see family, can't organize, can't even protest. Arresting homeless people for not being at home, shooting dogs because the dogs, could encourage people to break the restrictions. I mean, that's a totalitarian regime. That might sound weird to say that about Australia, but that's what we have. Countries have fallen into essentially dictatorships, right? Prime ministers and mayors and governors and presidents are not supposed to have such a level of power that they can literally just say pretty much anything at this point, it seems. And it goes with that. The whole point of having liberal democracies is that there are certain rights and freedoms and civil liberties that you don't just run over by declaring an emergency and then all of a sudden you can do absolutely anything. That power needs to come back in check.
And then from that point moving forward, these people that have jostled their way into positions of authority can essentially declare a state of emergency about anything, right? It's like, now it's terrorism, now it's a virus, now it's this. It's like, the thing I find so interesting about what's going on, I try to stay out of the fear of it and just know that the spirit of love and the spirit of humankind and those of us that have some sort of spiritual connection are going to overcome, and that we're in a transition of consciousness. And it's just like this portal that we're going through. But what's really trippy about this thing to me is that it's the first time in history where you don't have a single dictator that's in control of a certain geographic place, right? There's not a Lenin, a Mao, a Hitler that you can point to and go like, he's a baddie, right? It's this sort of shadowy conglomerate that are all in lockstep together with using all of the same tactics of propaganda, fear, manipulation. They're kind of morphine of cultural Marxism and all the things. But it's really weird because there's not like a single person in one country, right? And this goes totally to support all of the so-called conspiracy theorists. I mean, dude, I was listening to Alex Jones 20 years ago because it was kind of entertaining, and David Icke, who I've interviewed, and it was entertaining, and there was enough truth in there that I was like, wow, my red pill was 9/11 because it was just it was really obvious to me at a certain point that the official story that we've been told had like major flaws in it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't know what happened. I wasn't there and I didn't orchestrate it, but it's definitely fishy. And so I started listening to these people, and they're talking about, you know, forced vaccines and FEMA camps and the collapse of the dollar and, you know, worldwide pedophilia rings and all this kind of stuff. And it was like, there was sort of a morbid curiosity in it. But I think I was so kind of hopeful that humans couldn't be that degenerate, that it all sounded really extreme. And now you're looking at a place like Australia and it's like, oh shit, these guys were right about a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And I wish they were not. I wish they were crazy.
Oh,
I mean,
gosh,
the reptilians haven't like shape-shifted yet, you know? But I mean, outside of that, that's kind of the limit where I was like, I don't know, that's a little too far out, even for me, and I'm super far out. But like anything short of shape-shifting Hillary Clinton's is like pretty much on the table now and activated. And that's what I find kind of so, in one hand, kind of terrifying, but also it's like all of this deception and corruption that was hidden and would just emerge as like a single authoritarian dictator is now just all coming to the surface. And I think that's actually the thing that gives me hope, because you have moderate, rational people that aren't necessarily politically motivated. Like I've never been going like, wait, what?
Yep.
You know, we're seeing all this conflicting data on this whole thing. And it's like, you have normal people that are like, nah, man.
Yeah.
So what's your take on, you know, this sort of shadowy conglomerate? Like what's going on with this faceless monster, you know, that you have a Trudeau, you have a Boris, you know, whatever, like you have kind of faces, a Biden, but I don't really sense that these people actually have a lot of power other than signing a paper. Then people go, that's legislation. We're doing this now.
Yeah. It's clear that there's a government above the government that people typically think of when the word government is said, right? I don't think the top level is the national level. I mean, we already know that. We know that there are various governing bodies. Of course, in Europe, you have, you know, the EU, right? The EU sits above the national governments in many ways. That was part of the whole motivation for Brexit, right? People didn't want to have unelected officials in Brussels determining laws for people in the UK, everything from immigration policy to work policies, etc. So there are various global organizations. Not everything is shadowy. We know about from a so-called health perspective. There's of course the WHO. There's the EU. They have things like you've got things like NATO. You have like Davos. Like there's
World Economic Forum.
Yes, of course, World Economic Forum. So there are these groups and organizations that aren't necessarily shadowy. I mean, they're out there, they're official, they're public. And then beyond that, I don't know, right? Anything would be conjecture, but when they're all using the same terminology, whether that's Build Back Better or the new normal or
whatever you ever notice
right?
that these phrases they use in the propaganda, they're always three words.
Yeah.
There's some psychological, I don't know what it is, but there's got to be some psychological.
There's even a rhythm to them, Build Back Better, like one syllable, two syllables.
You should use that for your next album. Find three catchy words.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny.
But I noticed 6 feet apart, stay at home, safer at home. You know, it's like every little slogan
very
that's come
simple.
out. Yeah,
and it's the same thing in every country. I mean, I've traveled to 6 different countries during the past 18 months. And it's remarkably similar, even when it's in a different language. It's the same programming and it's the same nonsense. It's the same policies that don't make sense. Or walking into a restaurant, put a mask on, and then like walk 4 feet to your table and take it off and eat. Like that's a global rule. It makes no sense anywhere.
I mean, to be fair,
like a global policy.
It does make perfect sense that a virus can't get in you if you're sitting down.
Of course. Just like after 9 p.m., it becomes ravenous and you've got to have a curfew.
Man.
But this is the thing, right? And the problem is, I think there's something you said is interesting about your sort of awakening moment. And I think that, like you said, most people are good people. Most people are decent. I do believe that, right? I know that some people may be like, no, that's not true. Most people, I'm like, no, most people are decent, right? Whether or not you want to use the word good, debatable, but most people are decent. They're not waking up every day trying to make the world a worse place, right? Most people do mean well. And as a result of that, I think it's very, very difficult to understand the concept of evil or malice, right?
Yeah.
There's always the assumption, we as human beings tend to project. So if you're a decent and good person who means well, you typically assume that everybody else means well. And so it can be extraordinarily difficult to understand or even accept that there could be a possibility that there are people who don't, right? Whether you're talking about a criminal, right? It's extraordinarily difficult to understand the mindset of like a murderer, right? Or like a rapist, like someone who's like does evil, a mass shooter, et cetera, a serial killer. You can't understand the psychology because the motive doesn't make sense to you because you're trying to project that decency, that human decency onto them. So you're there trying to work out like, what? And I'm like, it's just evil, right? It could just be evil, right? I know people are trying to find all these other reasons. And it's like, no, it's just evil. Like you can't understand it because you're not like that.
100%.
Right? You're not like that. So
yeah,
you're not going to get like a clear, rational explanation as to why it's like that. And I think that most people in politics or the media who are really running this whole circus, I do think that most people, again, are decent. I know lots of people in politics. I know lots of people in the media, but there are people who don't, right? There are people who are psychopathic or evil or have, bad motivations. And that has a real impact, right? I mean, I don't know, after these past 18 months, I mean, you can give benefit of the doubt for a while, but if after this 18 months, someone is still in the phase of all of this going on is simply to protect people from a virus and to keep us safe and to stop, like, how can you still believe that, right? At some point, you have to just look at what's going on and see some of the absurdities and also see some of the cruelty in it, right? See some of the cruelty and the lack of, people are talking about compassion and empathy and caring about people. It's like, dude, expand your lens a little bit. As if we've been acting as if COVID is the only disease that exists, only thing that can kill people, et cetera. Like, what about the effects of these policies? What's this done to people's physical health, mental health? What's happened to suicide rates and depression rates? What's going on with people's well-being financially? How many businesses across the USA, across the world have been shut down permanently? And what are the effects on that, on employees, on business owners, et cetera, on the inflation? How many people are going to die? How many people, I think I saw something saying over 200 million people have been plunged into poverty over the past year and a half on a global level, right? All of this to apparently combat a virus that has a 99% plus survival rate in the vast, vast, vast majority of the population. In many cases, well over 99.9% if you're talking about young and healthy people. And this doesn't make sense. And also the policies, to this day, there's no solid evidence that lockdowns have helped to reduce deaths, right? There's no solid evidence that masks work in terms of actually stopping a spread of a virus. And there's not a lot of logical thinking going on, right? Like, you can't spread a virus you don't have. So even if you had a mask, like a properly well-sealed mask that actually could help stop virus particles, it would only make sense to wear them if you are sick. And actually, if you're sick, you shouldn't really be out and about anyway. So this notion that, like, if I don't have COVID and you don't have COVID, like, us sitting here wearing masks is totally asinine, right? If you're healthy, if you're not sick, then wearing a mask is asinine. It doesn't even make sense. And then the masks people are wearing, for the most part, they're not wearing them properly, and they're not even wearing properly sealed masks to begin with.
They're wearing like funk-filled bandanas.
Dude, it's just a charade. It's just performance art. It's theater, and people have become so attached to these.
Performance art. That's good.
Yeah, people. It's a huge game of charades. This is the biggest emperor has no clothes situation on a national and a global scale ever. And those who point it out are going to be called all types of names. Personally, I don't care about that. I've dealt with that for many, many years, and I'm like, whatever. But if you just look at it logically and rationally and detach the emotion, then I mean, there's no limit to the absurdity. So you can sit here we can give like dozens and dozens and dozens of things that don't make sense and that haven't made sense and that are contradictory, that are nonsensical, that don't make any, are not very non-scientific. And this is the thing. And I'd love to not even, it's such a weird issue because firstly, we're pretty much through it, right? In terms of the actual threat, in terms of the actual pandemic threat at this point now in August 2021, it's very, very low, right? Everyone who wants to have their injections has gotten them, which is largely, the vulnerable people. The death numbers and the hospitalization numbers are very low, especially compared to other things. When I left the UK, COVID was the 26th cause of death back in July, 26th. But what's getting 90% of the media attention, right? You're talking like 2-3 deaths a day. You've got places where they're literally 0 deaths a day. And people are still like, more lockdowns, more masks, more. I'm like, dude, you're never going to get out of this cycle, right? If you take somewhere like Australia or New Zealand, and again, it blows my mind that millions of people there actually support their policies they're doing. They're in a perpetual cycle. If you lock down every time you get a case, then you can't go back to normal, right? That never ends. It literally never ends, because they haven't been letting people out or in the country, right? So what happens? What's the exit plan here, right? You're going to just never let people out or in again because this disease is going to be endemic, just like cold and flu. So if the logic is, okay, we just shut down every single time there's a case, then it's like, okay, you're still going to be there in the year 2050, having these rolling lockdowns going on forever. And as we've seen, even in countries with high vaccination rates, people can still catch it. People can still spread it.
Look at Israel.
Exactly.
I mean, those guys are in real bad shape.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just like, well, this will never end. And my point all throughout has been, my point has been very, very simple. It's been the same thing everyone claimed they believed in 2019, right? It's just, look, we all assume risk every day. There's risk to everything, risk to absolutely everything. Every time you get in a car, you're taking a bigger risk statistically than, there's no young, healthy person who really is like freaking out every time they get in a car. But that would make more logical sense than freaking out for yourself over this particular virus, if we're talking statistics, right?
Yeah.
But people don't think like that. If you're looking at children, the flu literally kills more children than COVID does. Thank God, this thing barely affects kids.
Well, one good thing about this whole thing is that we've totally eradicated the flu and common cold.
Nonsense.
I was looking at some, scientific graph the other day, and it's like flu cases. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And I actually posted that on Twitter a while ago to my 2 followers, and and then someone I guess rebutted that, and we're like, that's because of masks. And I'm just like, oh my God,
that's amazing.
So I'm always interested in the human psyche and motivation. And even the conversation we're having is a little out of context for stuff that I normally talk about. I talk about spirituality and meditation and health and all the things. But because I think early on, I realized this was veering into health, that I was able to kind of find my voice with it and kind of break form in terms of the content I cover. I've never talked about politics or anything like that because I've never been interested in it. It's kind of just, same agenda, different face, whatever, just mind your own business and try to live your life. But going back to the piece you were talking about earlier, I wonder, and I've always wondered what it is about a certain personality type that so willingly surrenders their autonomy and common sense and intellectual discernment to authority, right? And going back to that, the dichotomy of these kind of 2 disparate groups of people that just see things in their reality so differently, right? And someone who is encouraging what they're doing to the poor people in Australia, like, no, it's for their own good.
Yeah.
Like, I wonder what it is about some of us, like-minded people. You and I have a very, similar kind of point of view on so many things, where we're just sort of like, I'm going to stay healthy, take care of myself, do my best to contribute positive energy into the world, to contribute more than I take. And, I'm sure we're imperfect at it. I'm speaking for you too, but I mean, no one's like that virtuous, right? Yeah. But it's like, this is my life, right? Like God gave me this body and this consciousness, and I really believe in karma.
Mm-hmm.
And there were, there's long periods in my life where I did a lot of messed up stuff, and I've been repenting and making up for it. Hopefully I'm in the credit side of that equation now at this point in my life.
Yeah.
But I've just kind of always been someone who just doesn't blindly believe anything I'm told.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm certainly not interested in surrendering the free will that the Creator gave me to some ambiguous power, but yet people are. There's some people seem to be more susceptible to fear. And I wonder what it is about some of us humans that just so quickly and so willingly go, okay, I give up, take care of me, daddy, and just, give their rights and their sovereignty over to these, the powers that be, these different government and medical agencies.
I think there are a lot of factors to it. A lot of factors. And something you said which struck me is you mentioned God and the Creator a couple times. And I think there's certainly a religious element to it in multiple ways. And this is not to say that all atheists or non-believers think in any given way, but certainly if you believe in God, whatever concept someone has of that, then that becomes the highest authority.
Right.
In the absence of that, it's not rare for that highest authority to become either the self or the state. This is a pattern you mentioned before.
Nailed it, bro.
Right?
That's it.
Before you mentioned Hitler, you mentioned Mao, you mentioned Stalin, right? Those guys were very anti-religion intentionally because they didn't want competition, right? It's very hard to get people to worship the state if they worship God, right? If they have a strong religious belief. So that is certainly an element. And I think that there are a lot of religious elements of what's been happening with what I call the COVID cult, right? It's not, people keep saying science, science, science and trust the experts, but it's not actually scientific, right? It's dogma. It's dogma. They get mad when you ask questions. They get mad when you point out the logical flaws and fallacies, et cetera. So I think that's a part. Similarly linked to it, and I have been thinking about this a lot, is I don't know if you do this, but I imagine you're someone who's quite in touch with the concept of your own mortality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think about it every day.
I'm very in touch with my own mortality, right? And
I think that's a very mentally healthy
yes, so do I.
Practice.
So do I. And I think that not everybody is. I think they've been confronted with it for the first time. Not because this virus is particularly deadly, but I think it's forced people to think about death and mortality. And that's really, really freaked a lot of people out. And I think also that, again, that's maybe links to the first part, which is that if one simply believes that life is just this moment we have here on Earth, then absolutely everything that can potentially extend or preserve or protect it, perhaps they feel must be done. And they're willing to use the power of the state to do that. So I think that's a factor. Then I think some of it on a less sort of religious or spiritual level comes down to personality traits. I've noticed that people who are lower in neuroticism, I think we've really found out like the neuroticism split here in personality, right? If you're low in neuroticism, then you're less susceptible to negative emotion, whether that's fear or anger or whatever it is. And some people are just, I'm very low in neuroticism. So it's really hard to like freak me out about anything. But some people are very high in neuroticism, so they get more anxious. They're more susceptible to fear. Doesn't matter if it's Trump or it's climate change or it's Brexit or it's this or the world is, they're just easier to scare. And so that's certainly a fact. And I think fear is also addictive. We always think of addictive emotions being things like, I don't know, joy or happiness or pleasure, but people can really get addicted to fear as well. And we've got millions of people now who are really caught in this loop of fear, right? You show them information or data showing them that they don't need to be as afraid as they are. Or you even give them certain stats and they will get angry at you and they'll shift the goalposts, right? If you tell them the deaths are low, they'll tell you that the cases are high. If you tell them that less people are dying, they'll start talking about long-term effects. Like, why? Well, it's not just about deaths; it's about long COVID and long-term effects, right? Which again, all this stuff they never cared about before because they were never told to. I mean, long-term effects from a virus have always existed, whether you're talking flu or cold, et cetera. If you give them information on, people, they want to remain scared, right? Everything in the narrative wants them to keep them scared. And I think people have also made it their identity, and it's become very tribal. It's become this thing where almost to show you're a good person, you're supposed to be terrified of COVID. You're supposed to wear your mask forever, get your shots, scream at everyone else to get their shots, and the more fear you display now in this weird tribe or cult, as I call it, that's like virtue points to you. The more afraid you are, if you're not scared, people get mad at me for not being afraid.
Me too.
Right? They'll get mad at you.
Yeah.
And it's like, why are you not as afraid as I am? Like, they want you to be afraid and to be a part of it. So I think people have really wrapped their identity in this thing. It's gone on for so long. I think the isolation has also helped with this, because when people are isolated, they do go a little bit loopy, right? I mean, if you want to really, really punish a prisoner, they're already in prison. You put them in solitary confinement. Human beings are social creatures. We're meant to be out. We're meant to be seeing each other's faces. We're meant to be talking. We're meant to be touching, hugging. All of these policies have been so antisocial. I think very few people have spoken about just how much of an effect that has. I often hear people say things like, well, even if masks aren't that effective, what's the downside? And I'm like, what's the downside to everyone covering their face all the time? You can't think of how that's not good for a society, right? We have a high trust society. Communication, us communicating right now, the fact that I can see your face and you can see mine and we can see each other's expressions, it's a core part of communication. You've got children now who are struggling to learn to speak properly, toddlers, because they haven't been seeing people's mouths for such a long period of time. You're having all the students having their socialization stunted. You're simply there's so many things to it. I mean, beyond the fact people are just go ahead.
Hearing impaired people.
Yes.
I'm not going to disrespect truly hearing impaired people, but I'm fairly hard of hearing, especially in one ear, probably about 40% out. And when this started happening, I realized I don't understand anyone, and it came to my awareness that I read lips.
Yes.
Right. And just micro expressions, and I communicate for a living, right? Like we're doing. And I was like, oh shit, what about people that are actually deaf? And
people don't think about that.
That is so brutal, man. People don't think about that. And I've actually communicated with a couple deaf people during this, and I'm just like, I mean, I'm not wearing a mask. People that came to work on the house and things like that. One guy in particular, and I was like, you can take your mask off. He's like, oh, thank you. And I didn't have mine on, and he could understand me. But
and just the the socialization, man, hanging out with your friends, seeing your family, shaking people's hands, hugging, talking, just all of that stuff. It's very hard to quantify, and I think we live in the era of people want everything to be like data and empirical and science, right? And it's like, there is science behind this, but it's hard to quantify the socialization. That social aspect is very hard to quantify. You can't sort of count it in the same way you can with some other facts and figures.
Yeah, it's a subjective quality of life sense that you have as an individual.
Exactly, but it's very, very real. Anyone who's been isolated for even a couple of days, it's not, it's weird. You start going weird. And some people have been like that for essentially forced for months, year plus on end in some cases. There's places that have essentially been locked down for a year now. Wow. Essentially for a year. So we're out here being normal, but there's people who literally for over a year, they've been in that lockdown mode, masks and sanitizing and not seeing people, not really talking to neighbors, not just not talking to people, but being fearful of each other.
Yeah.
Right? People have been trained. No, everyone around you is a threat. Everyone's a threat. Your family's a threat. Don't talk to your family. They're a threat. Don't talk to your neighbor. They're a threat. Absolutely don't talk to strangers. In fact, if you see them on the street, maybe walk to the other side. What is that doing to people's psyche, right? The social fabric to me is so important. It's so important. When you start seeing people viewing each other just as a threat, that's dangerous. And that leads to where we are. It leads to where we are now, where you've now got people talking about, the vaccinated and the unvaccinated as if they're like these two disparate groups, and one of them is scary and deadly and sharing, dangerous and spreading disease, and the other is, good and clean and healthy and whatever. And people are literally advocating for policies for, this group should not be allowed in restaurants and cinemas and gyms. Maybe they shouldn't even be allowed in grocery stores, and we shouldn't allow them on planes or trains either. When in history has that kind of segregation ever been a good idea? We've had viruses forever. Our entire lives, viruses have been around. And no one ever floated this concept of, if you have the virus, right? Just if you haven't taken a specific shot against it, which by the way is therapeutic and doesn't necessarily stop you from giving it to other people, then you're supposed to, we should just cast you out of society. I mean, it's bonkers, but it's been a totalitarian tiptoe. It's been very, very, very slow and gradual, boiling that frog slowly. And that's how we've ended up at this point now. And again, it's weird because some people are fully locked into that, whereas other people are just like, cool, like normal, life is just normal. And my concern is really about where that could go if it's pushed too far. That's my concern.
I mean, what I find really interesting about that tiptoe is how many people are completely out of touch with not so distant history, right? I mean, it's 2021. 1930s Germany was just a little while ago. I mean, like, this is not something we're looking at in ancient history, in ancient Egypt or Sumeria even. I mean, we're talking about like my grandparents who are all now deceased, but they were alive, right? My mom was, actually both my parents were born in 1942, at the end of World War II. And it's like, I don't know if it's purposefully left out of school or what, but I was a horrible student, hated school, dropped out of high school. I don't know anything about history really compared to an educated adult. And I even know, like, okay, this is the way this has gone historically. I mean, all of the touch points of like how this incrementally starts to roll out, it always ends up the same way, right? Again, going back to that, like an identifiable dictator, it's like they have a different flavor, right? They're super left or they're super right, but ultimately, like, the destination at which they arrive is everyone gets fucked. And a lot of people die. 100 million people conservatively have died at the hands of their government in the last 100 years.
And a lot of people deny that.
I'm 50. That's twice my lifetime. You know what I mean? It's just like, and not to be doom and gloom. I mean, we're gonna turn it around, guys. We'll give you some hope. But I'm just over here sometimes going like, wake up! Like what? Sounding the alarm.
Oh, I think there's a lot of this can't happen here mentality. I think people are still having that. I think even tons of people I tweeted the other day something about Australia, and someone literally said that Australians have just as much freedom as Americans.
They don't have a Second Amendment.
I was like, bro, you can't go outside, bro.
Yeah.
Right? Like, what are you even talking? Like, there's this level of denial and cognitive dissonance. And people always like to think that can't happen here. People assume that history is just in the past. People forget that we are living through the history of the future. Okay? So I can assure you that if you went back to Germany in 1900, none of them would have fathomed that what could have happened in the 1930s and 40s was going to happen. Of course not. Right? In the year 1900, no one was like, okay, over this next century, 100 million people are going to get slaughtered by their governments in the name of various political ideology. Like, no, they were like, no, look at how advanced we are compared to those people back in 1850 and 1800 and 1700, et cetera, right? So we're here in 2021 thinking we're all advanced and smart and we've got all these cool gadgets and whatever. It's like, dude, we're the same stupid people we've always been. We're no smarter than our ancestors. We have better stuff. We have better access to information. And that is the key, that access to information. But it's pointless if you can't analyze it and take lessons from it. The point of learning history is not just to know what happened in history. It's to understand the psychology behind it.
The patterns.
The patterns, and to prevent certain things happening again. You know what? For thousands and thousands of years, human beings thought it was a good, fine, and moral idea to enslave each other, right? To just have human beings as your slaves who just work for you, and you can beat them, you can kill them, you can rape them. You can do what you want. If they try to run away, you can do whatever. You just own them. Thousands of years, way beyond, when people think of slavery, they always think of the USA. It was a global phenomenon. Thousands and thousands of years, people thought it was fine. And now we look back at that and we're like, okay, we learned that lesson. Like, that's terrible. No one's out here trying to let's bring that one back. Yeah, right? You know what I mean?
I've yet to meet a proponent of slavery.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter where they are on the political spectrum. No one's trying to bring that back. And that's good, right? That's a lesson learned. We learned over time. You know what? Like, treating people differently based on their immutable characteristics, that's wrong, right? Racism is wrong. Like, we shouldn't be like, oh, that person has that skin color or they're from that place. Let's physically hurt them or let's treat them as a lesson. Again, like, great lesson learned. Took a freaking long time to learn it, but great. There we are. And so these are lessons learned from history. So that's the way that we are sort of better than our ancestors, and that we can take the lessons, we can study them and take those lessons and be like, okay, let's keep the good stuff, right? Let's maintain the good stuff and let's jettison the bad stuff. And I think there's that danger of getting to a level of so much comfort and arrogance of just thinking like, oh, well, we're just so far evolved and all that stuff that happened in the past, that can't happen again. Like, it's impossible, whatever. It's like, dude, I mean, it's happening right now in other places around the world. Right? There's like 2 million plus people in freaking concentration camps right now in China. North Korea exists, which is a giant concentration camp. Like, there's a whole freaking Holocaust going on there right now. The Rwandan genocide was less than 20 years ago, right? There's crazy stuff that is still happening and still happens. And it's a very sobering and quite a dark thought to think that, oh crap, like, the stuff that happened in history could happen again. And I understand why people don't want to think that way, because it also sounds very alarmist. But that's why I'm kind of like, look, like, let's nip it in the bud. Let's nip it in the bud, because if you let that go and you just keep letting it play out, because we're not fundamentally different from our ancestors, those same things could happen. I mean, we've seen a lot of that same mentality. When you're seeing things like people, and it's fringe people saying this, but some of them have blue check marks on Twitter. When you're seeing people saying things like, "Oh, you know what? If you don't get vaccinated and you get COVID, you should be denied healthcare." Right? That's dark. Or when you're saying, I've seen people saying things like, "Oh, I hope the unvaccinated people like hurry up and die so the rest of us can go back to normal life," and stuff like that, right? And that's dark. Like, anytime you're in the position where you're wishing harm or death upon another peaceful human being, you're in a dark place, right? You're in a very, very dark place, whether that's because you disagree with their politics or you disagree with their religion or you don't like them. It doesn't matter how much you don't like or you disagree with someone. Like, if you're wishing death upon them or you're hoping they get hurt, then you're not in a good place. And I think that with the narratives that are being put out there, especially because people are now being trained to view each other as a threat, that is dangerous. Because if you view somebody as a threat, what can you do to a threat, right? It makes sense we try to eliminate threats from our lives, right? And so if someone can be trained to think that another human being, rationally or irrationally, is a threat to their very existence, which I'm sure you've seen that, right? You go on certain conversations and you're like, whoa, like, these people are really. You
should see me walk through the airport with no mask. I've never worn a mask in an airport.
Good man.
I mean, going through the TSA they wouldn't let me through.
Yeah. I had that as well.
Cool, don't wear it. You're not coming in. I'm like, all right. So I put on my fake ass little mask for a second. But yeah, I walked through. I mean, it depends what city though too. But yeah, walking through the airport and you see it's like Moses parting the Red Sea. Really? People are just like, whoa, they move out of my way. It's just so strange.
Yeah, it's weird. And people also need to be aware that a small minority can really control things. I mean, that's what's happening, right? It's, as we said, most people are sane and reasonable, and regardless of someone's position on whether it's, masks or vaccines or whatever, most people aren't like there saying, we need to lock these people up or this person should be hurt or whatever. Most people aren't like that. But if even 10% of people are, then that's dangerous. That's dangerous, right? Like, because it only takes a small minority who are very aggressive and vocal and, I don't know, determined, say, to cause huge shifts in society. We've seen this many, many times. Sometimes it's, sometimes it's for good. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's nonsensical. Because most people also are conflict averse. This is a big thing. Most people are conflict averse. So most people don't really want to get in the fight. I'm not particularly conflict averse, so I don't mind having little daily battles, verbal spars, whatever, in the name of trying to get people to think and to, put rational thought out there. But most people would rather just not deal with it. Like you said before, you didn't consider yourself political before, right? And that's fine. Most people are not hyper political. But another thing that's happened is this past 18 months has forced people to think about how politics affects them. I mean, you can't shove it in people's faces any harder than this than by saying, you live in California? Okay, you can't go outside. In fact, we're going to shut down your business. You have to do this. You have to wear that. You have to do even if you didn't care about politics at all prior to 2020, you're suddenly seeing oh, wow, it does affect my life. Joe Rogan said a similar thing, right? He was the comedy cup, it directly impacts you, slaps you in the face like that. And you're like, wow, okay, it does matter who the governor is. I sent a group
text to all my friends in California today. I was like, vote yes, Gavin Newsom recall. Yeah. I'm like, I'm not the guy that's, suggesting how you vote or that you even do typically, but I'm like, I don't even live in California anymore. And I'm like, I just that's my home state. I just love that state and the people there so much. I was like, man, you got to get this guy out.
Yeah, it has an effect. That's the thing. It hasn't, and maybe during peacetime, you don't really notice it so much. But then when a crisis hits, whether it's real or it's fabricated, then you suddenly see the difference. So you can look on a state by state level, country by country level. I mean, there are some places in the world where I would not want to be in right now. I would really, really not want to be in, and I feel genuine sympathy for people who are stuck in certain situations. And another thing that something else that's happened is people haven't really thought about the impacts of a lot of people have, but many people haven't thought enough about the impact of the policies. So throughout a lot of these conversations, when you're talking to people, especially people who are more neurotic and worried about, say, the virus itself, they often don't think about the impact of the policies. They speak as if the lockdowns and mask mandates and business closures, et cetera, distance learning for kids, taking people out of work. They act as if these don't have real and serious ramifications, right? And that's the thing. I think you have to understand that everything everything in politics is always a trade-off, right? And people aren't really thinking about that. They're saying, that's when you get people saying things like, oh, well, if it saves one life, it's worth it. You're like, what? Imagine if you set policies like that in general. Firstly, let's reduce the speed limit to 30 miles per hour on the highway, right? That'll save way more lives than any of these lockdowns or mandates or what, undeniably. It'll save plenty of lives, but you understand that, okay, but that has other consequences. If you reduce the speed limit to 30 miles per hour, what's the impact on the economy? What's the impact on people's lives? What's the impact on the environment? There's a lot of things, I can't even predict them all, that would fall out from doing that. Firstly, no one would get to work on time. And so that'll have a massive impact on the economy. And if you impact the economy negatively, that actually leads to more poverty, which can lead to more deaths, et cetera. But if you just have this myopic focus of okay, we just gotta get this one number down and do whatever needs to be done to do it, screw people's civil liberty. You've literally heard that, Arnold, screw your freedom. Whoa. Since when's it been so cool to just flippantly throw away freedom? People used to fight for freedom. Now they're fighting to give it up and to have it taken away from people. So I hope at this point, and I do see this happening, which makes me more optimistic, is more people can just look up and think reasonably, because when people are caught up in emotion and fear, it shuts down critical thought. You really saw this back. Remember when everyone was buying toilet paper? The heck was that? Right? How was that rational or reason? Right? Toilet paper, of all the things you're stockpiling,
Yeah.
There's panda, buy all the toilet paper. Like what?
Yeah.
Like
if you got, I remember thinking, if you don't have any food, you're not going to make any poop to have to waste. And that need food to need toilet paper. You know,
it was a global phenomenon. Toilet paper gone in the UK, gone in Germany.
You guys had it
gone
too?
Yeah. Right?
Oh, funny.
This is the thing, right?
I thought it was just like a Walmart consciousness kind of thing.
No. This is the thing. So this shows, and people have conveniently forgotten about this. I have a long memory. So this shows how irrational people are, right? And then, but I think at this point now, more and more people can look up. And even if they were initially, worried or panicking or whatever, then they can look at it at this stage, 18, 19 months later and be like, okay, we're in a different situation now. We have all of these trillions of data points from around the world. There's, vaccines available to people who want them. And, most of the vulnerable people have taken them. There's other treatments available. We're at a whole different stage. The world now we're not in the same position we were in February 2020. So let's stop pretending that we are. Like people want the Delta variant, Lambda variant, like how are you going to go through the whole alphabet and keep coming up with new variants? It's like, look, guys, the disease is going to be endemic.
We just got to get to Omega and then everything will be back to normal.
Then you go back to the beginning. Then you start having like Alpha, Phi, Kappa. You start concatenating them like sororities and fraternities.
What do you think is at the root of your like resilient and positive attitude? When I hear you speak, I watch your interviews and stuff, and I'm like, my presumption is that you must have had great parents.
I do.
You seem like just a very balanced, healthy, emotionally and mentally healthy person. Were your parents both present and in your life and had their act together?
They still are.
Yeah.
They still are, thank God. I've got a wonderful family, amazing parents, amazing siblings. And also, I know my purpose. I very much know my purpose in the world. My goal is to have a positive impact through my words and my works on millions and millions of people. Through my music, my writing, my speaking, podcasts, interviews like this, any talent and ability that I have, to me, it's my ethical duty to maximize that and then to maximize my reach with it. And that's just like a permanent fire burning in me. Every single thing I do. I mean, that's literally the filter I run things through. It's like, okay, I get an opportunity, an offer, someone an email, whatever. I'm like, all right, does this move that needle closer to that goal? Yes, it does. Right. Okay. You want to have this conversation? Cool. All right. We're going to reach, I don't know how many thousands of people with this. Hopefully someone can take something from this and it impacts them in some positive way and it makes some shift. So that's what drives me. That's really, really what drives me. And it keeps me motivated. It keeps me fighting. People are always like, oh man, how do you deal with the negativity? I'm like, dude, it's whatever. Like it's just a little blip on that road. And the amount of love is 100 times any negativity that I receive. And it also matters more because the people who tend to criticize me or, call names or whatever, they don't know me. They're not familiar with my work. They don't really know what I'm about. They just see one tweet and they're like, oh, I don't like that one tweet, so I'm going to attack this guy. It's like, whatever. It doesn't matter.
You know what I notice about a lot of the very critical kind of trolling types online? And I don't know them personally, but, I'll take a peek at their public profile. Mm-hmm. It seems that often the people that are most critical of others are people that are not building or haven't built anything themselves.
Correct.
Right? Mm-hmm. And because there's someone like you that has a certain public profile because you're grinding and you're putting in work and you're building a platform and creating a voice for yourself, that, you become a target for people who, maybe on one level jealous because they don't have it within their constitution or their character to build something. I notice this a lot because there are a lot of, there's people that are kind of building platforms even on just trolling people. There's one that's, I think it's a podcast and like a social media. It's called Conspirituality.
Okay.
And their thing is they do these like really brutal takedowns of people that are in the health and wellness space and people that are into spirituality, but also don't want to wear a mask or something, for example.
Okay.
And, I look at something like that and I'm like, you're building on top of platforms other people have built.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're kind of piggybacking on someone who's already doing something in the world just to tear them down because you don't agree with their perspective. And, not to say that whistleblowers and things like that don't have a place, but I often find that I have a lack of respect or the ability to take anyone seriously that hasn't really done something for themselves.
No, take criticism from people you take advice from.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
Simple as that.
Exactly.
I don't care what, Joey 118697 on Twitter with 3 followers, says.
It's probably like a fake
probably about to begin with, right?
Yeah.
But it just doesn't matter, right? And I also just accept that, look, not everyone's going to like me. Like I do things a certain way. I have certain beliefs. I do a lot of things and I've accepted this for a long time. I make music, right? There's no musician who everybody likes, right? You can have the greatest musician out there play their song. Someone's like, that's trash. Other person's like, man, this is like the greatest band ever, right? That's just how it is. So people have different tastes. And then of course there's the envy and jealousy aspect, which magnifies as you become more successful and it exposes, it's easier to attempt to tear somebody down than it is to build something for yourself. But as you said, people who are builders are not haters, right? They're not haters. You'll never find someone who is successful and content and happy in life who spends all their time going around YouTube, thumbs downing videos and writing mean comments and trolling people on Twitter.
You don't have time.
No, you don't have time.
Even if my personality had that bent, I don't have time I can't even go on my own YouTube channel and respond to comments, let alone troll other people's. It's crazy.
Look, I think most men are either busy building or destroying. It's kind of what guys do from boyhood to adulthood. Men are normally building or destroying. And I think that's why, as a man in particular, also as a woman, it's important to build and to create something. Because if you don't, you may inadvertently find the energy's got to go somewhere. And I think as human beings, as men in particular, right, we got testosterone, like we're warriors, we have a level of aggression and ambition and whatever. And that can be channeled in such a healthy and positive way to building a business or building a family or building a project, creating something, building a community or wrecking one. Because if you look throughout history, that's generally what guys do. Build and destroy, conquer, take over, win, fight, lose, battle. It's why we like sports, right? It's a simulation of a war, right? It's like cool, it's another battle. It's just what happened, build, destroy, build, score a goal, destroy, like tackle, block, and that's just, I think that's how we're wired. And I think when people are not building something that's a net positive for themselves and others, then there's a tendency, it's kind of hard to be neutral, I think. Similar like with your body, right? If you stop exercising and you just eat, right? It's not that you stay the same. You regress. You go backwards. It's hard to just stay neutral, or even to stay neutral, you have to push forward. To maintain your strength, you got to keep working out. To maintain your fitness, you got to keep running. You got to keep training. You got to keep. If you don't, it's not that okay. You just stop there. It's no. You go backwards. So I think you've always got to be having your foot down on that gas to some degree. Otherwise, everything goes backwards. If you have a relationship and you're not constantly building, if you just leave it and you're like, okay, I'm not going to talk to that person again for 10 years or interact, like you don't come back and it's just the same. It's like, no, everything regresses. So you always have to be moving forward. I don't think there's really much of a neutral in life in that sense. Like it's either you're moving forward or you're regressing.
Very true.
Yeah.
What would you say to people that are starting to wake up and to discern that things are not as they appear, that we are being manipulated and there is coercion? Those people that have high empathy, right? Good people that you spoke to earlier that maybe last year couldn't imagine that there were people that were power hungry and greedy enough to actually harm humanity on such a large scale. And they're starting to go, wait, even to me, I'm no conspiracy theorist, but this doesn't add up. But they're afraid to speak out because of the condemnation or even the censorship they might face. I've gone through this even myself. I mean, it didn't last long, but in the very beginning, I was kind of like, watching people get deplatformed. And I was like, I'm just going to talk about meditation over here and just kind of lay back in the cut. Like, I don't want to make any waves and, lose my, my ability to earn a living. And then, it's the worse it's gotten. I mean, I haven't focused on it, exclusively, but I'm at a point now, like, I just don't give a fuck. I mean, I started a Telegram channel. I'm on there all day, just bombing, and I'm like, sometimes the thought will come like, dude, someone's going to see this. And then, you won't get a book deal, or you're going to lose opportunities or be judged or whatever.
But for every one of those, you'll get another opportunity.
Well, that's the thing, when I finally, not finally, but very soon into this, when I made a decision that I'm willing to sacrifice any of what I perceive to be valuable, because my heart is just, I can't be disingenuous and pretend like I don't have a point of view on this. I have a point of view, and I'm going to speak about it as intelligently and in an informed way as I can. And I'm not like just so brazen that I just get all of my shit deleted. But I have my way of kind of peppering in information, hopefully low key, but still enough to impact people. But I'm so glad that I did that. And now I'm going even harder because I feel like the stakes are so high right now. But anyway, enough about me.
That's all good.
Back to the question is, I know a lot of people, when I started to speak out, would, DM me, and even some prominent people in my field, and were like, damn, bro, you got balls. I wish I could do that. And I'm like, you can do that.
There you go.
Like, you can do that.
And I can guarantee you, by you doing it, you've encouraged other people to do the same.
I hope
part
so.
Of that, absolutely. Guaranteed. That's part of why it's so important, because it emboldens other people. People don't want to be the first one to break the line or to stand out, etc. So by other people doing so, it kind of gives them the permission and the inspiration to do their little bit, And like I say, I often tell people, look, not everyone has to do what I do or do what you do. Not everyone needs to be in it that much. But if everyone can just be, 10, 20% more courageous and bold and willing to speak up. If you see something that's going wrong, say something. You don't need to go to some level where you're really, really freaking out about, I'm going to get deplatformed or whatever, right? Like, but just if everyone collectively did that, because most people at this point know that something janky is going on, right? They're not really on board with this. Ooh, like vaccine passports, like show your papers to go. I don't know about that one. Even someone who's had both shots, and that not a lot of people think you should be like forced or coerced to do that. Most people are not in favor of segregating people in this way. Like, most people are not in favor of it, but they won't speak up enough. So if all those quiet people, those people DMing saying like, man, I wish I could, like, say, if you speak up in your workplace, online, wherever it is, just do your little bit, even in conversations with friends, just, break that thing. You'll often find by you saying something, other people will be like, yeah, actually, I agree with you. Like, you're right, because that's it's the winning argument. It's a better argument, and it makes sense, and it's logical, etc. But I think the first thing people have to do, though, is firstly understand that it's okay to accept that you were wrong on something, or that you were naive, or that your opinion has changed or whatever. People now think that you have to form one opinion and it can never now change, right? It's immutable. Even new data, new arguments, new facts. No, I'm sticking with the original thing, right? And so many people do that. I think it's to save face, maybe because of the ego, or they're worried that someone's going to call them a flip-flopper, or whatever it is. But that's what intelligent people do. If you believe all the same things that you did 10 years ago even, or even 1 year ago, then you're not growing, you're not learning. So there's an element of humility of just being like, you know what, like, I was wrong on that thing. And it's hard to do. Like, we all like being right. Nobody wants to be wrong. People don't want to really change their minds. So that's the first thing, just having that level of humility to be willing to do that. And then, like you said, I mean, I don't know if you're aware of that. You sort of subtly said this, is you can kind of start small, right? Start small. Just say, even if it's in private conversations, right? You're talking with your friends, you're talking with your family. You're like, you know what? Like, have you seen this thing? Or share an article, or here's another perspective on this. What do you think? Just open that conversation up to get people thinking. And then as time goes on, you'll find that your fear is not as valid as you think it is. People think, oh my gosh, you say one thing on Instagram or Twitter and you get deplatformed. It's like, dude, the level of fear is I have big problems with censorship and deplatforming and stuff like that. That's another conversation. But the level of fear people have around it is overblown. Just like the level of fear people have with COVID is overblown, right? Yes, there is a concern, but it's not as simple as people were the same with Trump and Brexit. They're like, oh my gosh, like if I voted for Trump, but if somebody finds out, then I could lose my job. It's like, you think you're going to lose your job because you voted for Trump? Like, where are you working? Where, like that, just that would, that's an overblown. If you're working somewhere that would literally fire you because you voted for one of two major candidates, then you should go find another workplace because that's deeply intolerant. But in 99% of cases, that's in someone's head. That's not reality. Like, they think people will have that. Most likely there'll be another couple people who are like, oh yeah, so did I. Or there will also be people like, oh, okay, I don't like him, but why? Like, what's the reason? Like, most people aren't that unreasonable. You get these crazy people on Twitter and YouTube or whatever, but most people are decently respectful and empathetic. And even if they disagree with you, they're not going to want to just like kick you to the curb or cast you out or whatever. So I just think I encourage conversation. Challenge, questioning. If something, like I said, something doesn't make sense or something that you see which you think is wrong, then say something. Say something. You don't need to make it your life mission. You don't need to be out there every single day building a whole platform or whatever off of this. But if we can all just be a little bit more bold and a little bit more courageous, then I think society in general will move in a much better direction. I think because we've been so pampered for the past several decades. If you live in the modern Western world, like, no wonder we're reacting like this to a virus with so deadly that the population grew last year. It's like, think back to previous pandemics, right?
That's good.
Right? Think back to previous pandemics. Yeah. Like, you were talking about like 30, 40, 50, 60% death rates from certain diseases, bubonic plague, Spanish flu. It's men, women, children, left, right, and center dying. Everyone's losing family members, people. But that created strong people, right? If you look World War I, World War II, how many young men died fighting for people? And when you think of World War I, World War II, some of these guys are 18, 19, 20, 21, going out fighting in war, landing on D-Day, like machine guns firing. And they're like running out there, like, and now people are like, 99.9% survivor rate. Where's my mask? Let me put my blanket. I'm like, dude, guys, like, where's that courage? This isn't saying like be reckless and, go out and try to, get sick or make other people sick. No, but it's just like, instead of trying to nerf the world all the time, try to make yourself more resilient. And coming back to what we primarily do and what we talk about, it's part of why we're big on health in general, right? Health in general, strengthen. There's been such little communication about how do you make yourself stronger, right? Not just for this particular disease, but for all of them. What are the biggest killers, man? Heart disease and various types of cancer, large cardiovascular disease, many of which are largely linked to obesity, in which you can do something about.
And not to mention the one that is not always the third, but has been the third and is usually in the top 5, which is medical malpractice.
Medical malpractice, yeah.
No one likes to talk about that.
No one wants to talk about that. Yeah, but strengthen yourself, boost your immune system, exercise, drink water, get enough sleep, actually socialize and enjoy your life. Go outside, get some sunlight, take some vitamin D if you need it, take some zinc if you need it. Just pretty, basic things that will protect you to some degree against all of these ailments. Health is, like I said on the Rogan podcast, health is holistic. It's not just wear a mask and take a jab and shut up. It's like,
well, I think that's, to me, one of the biggest red flags about the message of we're doing this for your safety.
Exactly.
Right. And with the whole push for the shots and, being motivated by free donuts. And I was just, after your talk the other night, actually, I went across the street totally coincidentally to get some bomb ass donuts. I was on a gluten spree. And right when I sat down, there was a radio ad that was like, go get your vaccine now, and get a free HEB gift card.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, okay, cool. Like, for people that want to do that and you want to get your groceries for free, that's great. But like, why isn't the government sending vitamin C tablets, or as you would say, vitamin C tablets to everyone, like, why isn't everyone getting, I saw maybe a tweet the other day, it was like, maybe it was Cernovich going like, how about give everyone a Peloton bike?
Yeah.
It's like, if they really cared, then why wouldn't there be emphasis on general health and teaching people
profit motive,
how to avoid, obesity and eat organic and just basic stuff that isn't even fringe health. Just take care of your vessel and you'll be more resilient to everything. And I think the fact that there's just none of that, not only is there none of that, there's also such opposition to people like me in the, I guess you could say, alternative health space, where people are getting deplatformed and vilified and called anti-vaxxers and crazy and snake oil salesmen and all this, because we're just going like, the body does actually have an immune system. It's like, it's why is that controversial?
No, this is the thing, but it speaks to a deeper point in our society, which is this, it comes with that level of comfort, like I was saying before, which is this push for the path of least resistance in everything. Getting in shape is hard. Eating right is, it takes challenge. It's a challenge. It takes some discipline. Going to the gym, whether you're trying to build your muscle or build your endurance or just change your physique, it's difficult, right? It's hard to strengthen yourself. Just like we were saying before, it's hard to build something. It's a lot easier to tear down. It's easy to wear them. Like, people like the mask thing because it's easy. It makes them feel like they're doing, even if it's totally useless, right? And to this day, there's no strong, solid evidence that it's made any difference in terms of the mask mandates. It's easy, and it provides not just it provides a visual virtue signal that you're doing your part, right? I can guarantee you, by you and I just simply being healthy, being our usual healthy selves, that has done more to protect us and stop the hospitals from being overwhelmed, and like, that's done more than people running around in masks. It's done more than lockdown, but we can't really like virtue signal off that. I can't be like, look at me. Like, I don't even use the NHS, man. I pay into the NHS. I haven't even used the thing for, I don't know how long, because I'm in great shape. Right. But that doesn't get me any virtue points in this era. But if I just wore a mask, put in my profile picture, look at me wearing my mask everywhere. All of a sudden, even though I'm not sick, right? All of a sudden, I'm suddenly like a great person, hashtag wear a mask, hashtag, take the shot, whatever. And now I'm a wonderful person. But if I talk about actually, strengthening, boosting your immune system naturally, or lifting weights, or eating nutrition, all the stuff I've been promoting, by the way, for more than a decade, then, I've even had people be like, you're fat shaming. I'm like, bro, we're talking about a virus where 80% of the hospitalizations are people who are overweight and obese, and you're worried about me fat shaming, right? And that's another thing that people don't want to talk about, right? The obesity impact, right? Because the truth is, even with this particular virus that everyone's obsessed with, is to a large part, this is it's kind of like a finisher disease, right? It's not a disease that will, in many cases, take someone who's like young and healthy and in good shape and has decades and decades of life ahead of them and just like kill them in the way that, I don't know, some types of cancer, for example, could, right? Or Ebola could. It's not like that. If you look at it, in every single country, the vast majority of people dying are people who are elderly with comorbidities, right? So this is a virus where if you're old and or you've got some serious health issues, then it's far from a death sentence. But it's a concern. It makes sense to take precaution, et cetera. And those are the people who resources, as I've been saying for more than a year, should particularly go towards. But there's things you can do. So if I were very overweight and I saw, oh my gosh, like 80% of the people being hospitalized from this are overweight. Okay, I'm going to lose some weight, right? And God bless and shout out and congratulations to everyone who does that, because there are people who have done that. My own parents included, in fact, who are in their 60s and their 70s, right? So wonderful. My mom had diabetes, reversed it, right? Last year, she had been diabetic for 5 years, took care of her diet, exercise, totally reversed it. It's now in remission, doesn't take any more medicine since then. And that's what happens when you take the power into your hands. That, again, this doesn't mean that like you still can't, if you want to get the shot, you can get the shot if you think it makes sense for you, whatever other medicine you like. I'm open. I think anyone who wants to, my thing is just like the freedom, right? My problem is with the coercion, the bullying, the shaming, the division of society, the segregation, all that. That's the stuff I have a problem with. I'm not even in the camp, but I know there are people who think like the injections themselves or vaccines. I don't really call them vaccines because they're not really traditional ones in the most part. But I know there are people who think like, okay, like there's something particularly sinister about them or something. Like I don't know about that, and I'm not in that camp. I'm just simply like, look, it should be just like every other medicine or every other medical procedure. It should be up to the individual. People can do their own risk analysis, weigh up their pros and cons, do the research. I'm for informed consent.
Yeah.
And I'm for people being allowed to make their choices and live their life as they see fit.
Imagine if, someone came to you and said, you have to take chemotherapy. Or if someone even came to you and said, you have to drink this whole bottle of cough syrup every day. You know what I mean?
Yeah, even to take an aspirin, I'd be like, no, I don't need an aspirin.
I don't really have a headache. Yeah. No, you have to take this aspirin. Yeah. I mean, to me, that's also at the core of this thing is just, and that's why I'm like, yo, you got to wake up, people. This is no joke. When it gets to that point, make like an experimental gene therapy available for people who want it. Cool. But when you're starting to cut off basic life services for people and segregate them, like we got a serious problem.
Exactly. And I would fight for, if there were, if the scenario were reversed and I don't know, companies or governments or whatever were trying to say that, if you are vaccinated, then, you're not allowed in this restaurant or you're not allowed. Like, if I would be fighting, I'd be fighting the same fight. I'd be like, no, that's wrong. That's discriminatory. We shouldn't be, people should be allowed to make those choices and you shouldn't be treating them different. Like to me, it's the same thing, right? It's not the vaccine is almost like not the point. It's the general principle and concept. And there's nothing more invasive than injecting something into your body, right? And if the government can force you to do that or attempt to or coerce you, then, I mean, you're a slave. You don't own yourself, right? If the government can force you to inject something into your body, they can make you do anything. Like they can really make you do anything. Who's to say, I mean, what's the next hysteria that they want to push? Climate crisis, climate emergency, whatever. They could be like, okay, and this has happened before. China used to have a flipping one-child policy. The government told people how many children you can have. What if they start saying, to reduce the climate, people need to have less kids. Like, here, everyone needs to.
Or a family can only have one car.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Like
but even a car, that's not as invasive. Like that's authoritarian. But like your body, I remember being a kid. I remember when I was a kid, and I learned in school about China's one-child policy, and I didn't have like the sort of political framework or historical knowledge to any extent that I have now. But I remember just in my gut being like, what? Like the government can tells people how many children they have? And I remember asking my teacher and being like, well, what if someone has another? And I think the teacher I can't remember what he said. Maybe he said something like, well, they get rid of it. And I was like, well, do you mean like what? They're like, you're right. Yeah. I'm just like, I was a kid. I was like, what?
Yeah. I remember thinking the same thing.
Yeah. And I was just like, I just remember it striking me and I was like, that, like, and I remember it because it was spoken about kind of like neutral. It wasn't spoken about like, oh, this is a bad thing. It was just like, yeah, well, this is the population graph. And if people keep having children, then, this and what. And I'm like, just fundamentally at my core, I was like, that's wrong. Like the government shouldn't be able to do that. Like no one should be able to like dictate how many children somebody has like that. Now looking at it as I'm older, it's like, it strikes me even harder and I can articulate better why it does. But I remember even as a kid just being like, man, that's nuts. But that's the thing. But this is the thing. I'm very much like, I base a lot of things just off principle. And it's like, a government has a certain role. The state has a certain role, and the role isn't. This is a huge overstep. It's a huge overstep. If you're trying to coerce people or force people to do this just to live and go back to their normal life and get their freedoms back, then you could do that for anything. You could literally do anything. I mean, then there's no limiting principle anymore. It's just like, okay, well, yeah, the population is getting too high. Okay, well, you know what? We're going to just start sterilizing people. Like, what would be the argument against that? If someone were, say, cool with these mandatory vaccines and name of the greater good or whatever, however they believe it is, what would then be their argument? Say that the population does really start booming or whatever, and it's like, oh, we need to. What would be the argument against forced sterilization? What would be their line of argument? They don't have one anymore. They don't have one anymore. It's just like, well, it's for the greater good, I guess. Stop being selfish. Why do you want to have so many kids? Don't be selfish. Just take the shot.
They make another 3-word slogan,
Yeah.
Just have one.
Just have, right.
I already have the marketing campaign starting.
I have seen that one, by the way. I have seen that one. Or, you've got the whole like childless, child-free movement, et cetera. So, antinatalism is a real thing that already exists, but it's, they've said for decades, since the 1970s, even in the USA, that the greatest threat to the world is overpopulation. There's people who truly believe that. Bill Gates himself, I think, believes that.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's gnarly, because you have to think of what that means, right? Like, what does that?
Who decides?
Yeah.
Who goes?
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And
who decides who can procreate? I mean, that's serious God complex. That is like,
exactly.
You were stepping on the toes of God. Like, I don't envy the karma that one has for stepping into that role. That's diabolical.
It's diabolical. Exactly. Yeah. And people need to be, that's where people need to be careful. People need to really be careful with this. And again, we have examples from history of how this stuff, forced sterilizations have been a thing in the past, or people being, forced abortions or whatever it is. And it's dark. We're talking about human beings. We're talking about human lives. We're talking about individuals and their rights and their liberty, et cetera. And if there's one thing that you own, it's your body, right? It's like, okay, like, that's
all you can really own.
Yeah, I mean,
honestly,
yeah, it's like, okay, if I don't even own that, and someone can just control, and then people make these ridiculous arguments by like saying like, oh well, what about seatbelts or drink driving? I'm like, well, that's not. It's so disingenuous, right? Because people know it's not, like, it's a massively false equivalence. By the way, I don't think it should be mandatory to wear a seatbelt, but again, people do their risk calculation. I don't actually think most people wear seatbelts because it's mandatory. I think it's because, if you crash your car going at 60, 70 miles per hour, that's a different risk calculation to, just living your life normally when there's like a bad flu going around.
That's funny, because I remember when I was a kid in the 70s, it was very common for people to not wear seatbelts and also no helmets on motorcycles. Yeah. Like, I remember riding around with my grandma, like, I put a seatbelt on in the old Oldsmobile, the old hoopty she had. You just get in, you climb around, you're just playing around in there. Yeah. But then as I got older, the law was instated, or had been probably by the time I started driving. And I remember being like, oh man, I don't want to wear my stupid seatbelt.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And then, with a little bit of age and hopefully some wisdom, I mean, I would never drive anywhere without my seatbelt on now, but not because it's a law, but as you said, because I'm not an idiot. I don't want to fly through the freaking windshield.
I think the best thing you can do is give people information, right? Give people information. This is another thing that they've sort of skipped over with this thing, which makes people more skeptical about this whole vaccine rollout.
Yeah.
Right. It's like they skipped over the let's properly inform people openly and honestly stage. It went very quickly to, okay, let's offer it. Okay, now let's we're going to have like weird incentives, whether it's giving away cheeseburgers or hot dogs or doing $1 million lotteries or all this weird stuff, which again, to people who are already kind of like, that makes us go like, whoa, okay, like that's really weird. And then when it moves to, now we're just moving straight to coercion, right? No jab, no job, no restaurant access. Like, we're going to threaten you. It's like, wait, what about just like giving people clear, honest information and then letting them make their own rational decision?
Like some ingredients on the insert that comes with every other pharmaceutical medication. Yeah, I saw a nurse the other day open up one of the packets and it's blank.
Yeah.
There's just nothing, there's no information on there. And you're expected and coerced to just take some mystery thing into your arm. Like,
yeah. I mean, I've read the, in the UK anyway, I can't remember whether it was I think it was the Pfizer one. I think there was the leaflet, and I read I read through all the stuff, and it's just like, just give people that information, give people real stats. Okay, look, if you're 70 years old and you get COVID, this is the estimated probability you'll be hospitalized or you'll die, whatever. The vaccine, we've tested it and we think it brings it down to this level, whatever. If you're if you're 25 years old, honestly, if you're 25, you don't have comorbid, probability, you shouldn't be worried about this thing, right? Like you shouldn't be worried, let alone, if you're 15 or and they're trying to jab 10-year-olds now. I mean, who are just trying to, their survival rate's already 99.999%. And what, you're trying to raise it to 99.999% or potentially, we don't know the long-term effects. That's just a fact. We don't know. And that's why it should be a choice. If I were 80 years old and I had diabetes and I was overweight, I'd be like, yo, give me that shot. Right? But I'm 35 actually now. I'm in great shape and I've already had COVID. So there's literally no logical reason. There's no scientific reason, no medical reason why someone like myself, it would make sense to take that. Doesn't make sense. Doesn't mean I shouldn't be allowed to if I wanted to, but there's no logical reason, right? And people aren't even thinking about this. They're just acting like one size fits all. Everyone's the same. 15-year-old is the same risk as an 85-year-old. Whether you've had it or you haven't had it, it doesn't matter. Just everyone should take the shot. And I'm like, that's not an honest, that just reeks of, okay, this is a power grab. This is a money grab. You do not have our best interests in mind. And that makes people more resistant, more skeptical, et cetera. If I were in charge, if I were on the, I don't know, if I were some person in public policy and my goal was to promote the vaccine, shall we say, right? Or encourage people to get, my approach would have been totally different to this thing, right? Just as a communicator, right? Not just it's just been threats and incentives, right? Not just look, here's what we're dealing with. Here's what's offered. Here are the different options. Here's on the table. Here's some data for you. These are the risks. Also, be honest about the risks, right? People are acting as if there's no side effects. Everyone knows people who've had vaccine side effects. We all do, right? Whether they talk about it.
You should see my Telegram
feed,
feed,
whether people talk about it openly or not, right? And it's be open about that. Don't just people trying to bury it.
Or the other medications that have proven to be effective and been suppressed. That's another thing where I'm like, oh, it's for our safety.
Exactly.
Why are you silencing all these doctors and scientists and nurses from around the world that are like, hey, I've been treating X amount of patients and they're doing great using this cheap, safe.
If we say the word, we can't put this on YouTube.
I know. I just got a YouTube video deleted today.
It's insane, man.
I felt so proud.
It's insane, And my family background is originally from Nigeria, and which continent has barely been impacted by this thing? Africa. Oh wow, there's a continent of over 1 billion people, generally with much poorer healthcare and infrastructure than the entire West, and we're going to just act like it doesn't exist, rather than taking some lessons from there and going, oh, the whole continent of Africa has had less deaths from this disease than England. Okay, what can we learn from that? No, we just don't talk about it. What else don't we talk about?
What about there was presidents from a couple.
Oh gosh, the Tanzanian president, et cetera.
I think there were two others too.
Yeah,
I remember thinking, where's Black Lives Matter on this? That was Black presidents getting suicided because they're not opting into the shot program.
Definitely
I'm like,
sketch.
Where's the outrage here? It's
definitely sketch. What else don't we talk about? We can't talk about China.
Yeah, well, you'd be racist,
dude.
That would be.
We can't talk about where the whole thing started. The whole thing started. They were rolling out vaccines in spring last year. What freaking vaccine was that? How did they have a vaccine? What? You're saying you got only 4,000 deaths in this whole thing from a 1.3 billion population, epicenter of the disease? 4,000 deaths. Does that sound right? Oh wait, so you're telling me the USA has had 600,000 deaths? China had 4,000. Bruh, there's so much janky stuff going on, right? It's just and if we had real journalists and more of them, they'd be the ones having these conversations. It wouldn't be,
It's up to knuckleheads like us.
It's up to the gym bros and the conspiracy theorists and the yoga chicks and whatever. And it's these are obvious, and it's the
green juicers
obvious.
had to come in and really put the hammer down, to get the truth out there.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about, you've talked about virtue signaling, and to me, this is another fascinating social phenomenon. And I started to see these social justice warriors kind of emerge a few years ago that were really hit their peak when Trump got into office. It was just everyone's outraged, and it's sort of it's a sort of a competition for the most virtuous person and the biggest victim, and who can be the most outraged as kind of a form of virtue signaling.
Yes.
And you talked about, the mask, and I see people, posting photos of them getting the shot, or they get a tattoo of the, Pfizer Band-Aid on their arm, and God bless it, whatever. Like, I'm like, you do what you want. But, do you think that people that are really hell-bent on showing and proving their virtue publicly, that underneath that is perhaps a sense that they're less than worthy, and that they actually lack intrinsic value as a person, and they're using these expressions of hoping to get public approval and accolades to kind of fill that void of not feeling worthy themselves? Have you ever looked into kind of what's behind that behavior?
I think that's a part of it. I think a lot of people care more about looking good than doing good. And this is not a new
It's a lot
thing.
harder to do good.
Yeah. Yeah. But also doing good tends to be quite subtle. You don't necessarily get accolades for it all the time, right? If you just day by day do, small acts of good or charity or whatever. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, if you go back to when I think of virtue signaling, I mean, it goes back to biblical times, right? The Bible talks about virtue signaling, right? About the person who goes and, very boastfully gives money in a very ostentatious way, and they're showing off how much money they're donating and giving to the church or whatever. And then there's the person who quietly, even if they give less money, but they just quietly, do their little bit. Then what do they say? He who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. So this
that's good. Is that in the Bible?
That's in the Bible.
That's dope. Yeah. Wow. That's a great principle.
Yeah. So it's not a new thing. I mean, it's why Jesus had beef with some of the, the Pharisees, et cetera, because they were talking the talk and, outwardly seeming to be the most pious and holy people and whatever. But then behind the scenes, they were, behaving in this dodgy way. It's also why, both people within and outside of the church have issue with, I don't know, say like the whole Catholic peace sex scandal thing, right? It's particularly bad, not just because it's a sex scandal, but because it's freaking priests. Like, you're the guys who are supposed to be the moral and spiritual leaders of a church and of a community and for millions of people. And then for them to do that, it's that much worse. And then, or when you get these guys who are, profiteering off of it and just making all this money, preaching, prosperity gospel, and, donate, we need to get more offerings so that I can buy a private jet, all that kind of stuff. Like, man, nothing undermines religion more than people like that. That's for sure. But virtue signaling is not a new thing. I think it's always existed. I think with social media, there's a new way to do it.
Right.
There's a new way to do it. Like, you can very publicly, just put in the right hashtags or put in a couple emojis in your bio, put in your pronouns, and all of wear a mask in your profile picture, and all of a sudden, I think people also do it not just because maybe they feel something intrinsically, but also people feel it gives them the right to be an a-hole, right? As long as you have the right hashtags in your bio and you put up your BLM Black Fist and you put your pronouns and whatever, then suddenly you can be really, really vicious to people and really actually unkind to people, but you're still a good person.
Right.
Because
your motives are to help.
Yeah.
So you can tear someone down.
Yeah, or you can at least pretend that they are, man. The worst people I come across consistently are people with virtue signaling stuff in their bio. They've got the pronouns, they've got the rainbow flag, they've got the hashtag BLM, whatever. And then as soon as, they come across somebody who differs from them politically or who they disagree, like, they will be vicious, right? They'll be the most intolerant, aggressive, insulting people out there. And they think that, oh, well, that's fine because I'm sticking it to those Trumpers, or I'm, doing it to those anti-vax idiots or whatever. And that's dark. If you're a virtuous person, you don't need to signal it in these ways. You just do what you do. You get on with life. You don't need to, boast about every single thing or hide behind these. I don't know. Like, look at June. June is what I think it's ridiculous that there's a whole month for Pride, right? But June is Pride Month. Okay, what happens? Every corporation now, they put up their rainbow flags and whatever, and people are there like, oh, you look at how much we care about gay people. Or this time last year, BLM stuff, George Floyd died, and all of a sudden, look how much we care about black people, like, BLM, blah blah blah. And it's like, dude, just be a mensch, just be a decent person. Like, I don't care if someone is black, white, straight, gay, what. I don't need to go out there. So you get the same with these male feminist types. Oh, I respect women. It's like, you should respect women. Like, you should respect people. You shouldn't be like,
it's kind
just
of,
be normal.
it's kind of like, yeah, well, like I'm thinking of the male feminist. I always get the sense that they're actually like a creep or something. You know what I mean? It's like you don't have to walk around going, "Hey, I'm not a rapist." You know what I mean?
It's overcompensating. That's the thing, right? I'm more suspicious of the guy who's like, got BLM in his bio and is anti-racist and, going on about how much they care about black people and people of color. What I'm suspicious of that guy, right? Just like the guy who's like, super homophobic and always like, it's like, maybe he's like, right? You know what I mean? It's like, dude, just be normal, man. Just treat people normally, like whatever. And you don't need to make this huge song and dance about it. If you do, it actually makes me think like, what are you trying to hide something? Like, why are you being so, like, I've never in my life felt that I need to, drape myself in rainbow flags and, hashtag pride, like to show that I'm not homophobic or like, it's like, whatever, man. I just treat people fairly. I treat people equally. Cool. And that's it. Well, I don't need to run around, running around telling people I'm an anti-racist. It's like most people are anti-racist. Like most people are anti-racist. Like people aren't out there, we're not in the 1920s. Maybe in the 1920s where racism was like a really common thing, you needed to like explicitly say something about that. But if you're
right, like if the vast majority of your sect or your population is one way and they're evil racist, then you might be more inclined to be like, hey, I'm not with that.
Exactly.
Like if your town in Kentucky in 1890 was run by the KKK or whatever, you might be on like the down low, like, I'm not.
Yeah, I'm not.
But if that's not really the prevalent thought, then you kind of just roll. Yeah. You mentioned something interesting about, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, the inversion of what we call, conservative or liberal, right? They've just totally flipped. Where a guy like me, I'm a straight up hippie, dog. And if you looked at like my value system on paper, I would be considered probably a right-wing extremist, And I'm just like, I sit around and meditate. I take plant medicines, like I'm pretty out there. But because I'm not down with tyranny and I believe in the freedom of the human spirit, I would be classified as that. But anyway, it's like, I've definitely noticed that people that are in the social justice camp that have this guise of being the most for the underdog, ultimately are the most like vile and abusive and just kind of, and I'm saying this is true of all those people. It's a gross generalization, but they're like actually much less tolerant. It's like you look at groups like Antifa or something like that, and their message, I think, is like anti-fascism. Yet, they're going to like religious gatherings and beating the shit out of old ladies and people of color, and like. There's just no rhyme or reason to it. And even though I don't really get into the realms of politics or even social issues much, it's not really my lane. But I remember when the George Floyd thing happened, and it's like there was this guilt of association on my Instagram just because I didn't like get the memo that you're supposed to post a black square or whatever.
I had a few white liberal women unfollow me on Twitter because unfollow me on Instagram because I didn't post the black square.
First off, I didn't know about it.
I knew.
B, like if I was going to give a commentary on that, it would be from my heart out of love for my fellow
the black square, you bigot.
Humans. And I would say I got a lot of pushback, but I got some DMs and like comments like, why aren't you saying anything? You have a platform, like you owe it to black people. And I'm like, that actually sounds really racist. Like,
and a year on, all those people are, they've moved on to the next thing.
Do you need me to like go to bat for you? You're a grown ass man. Like you're out there.
Don't just be normal, man. That's all I ask. It's all I ask of people. Like just be normal. Just don't treat me differently in a certainly based on my skin color in like a special way, nor a bad way. Just,
as a black guy, do you find,
can't stand it.
Do you find that inherently racist? That
I find it freaking annoying. I don't necessarily find it racist per se. Okay. I find it freaking annoying, right? It's just like, just be normal. I don't need, I assume that people are not racist. Right? Like, I assume I don't need someone to suddenly like, oh, a black man died in Minnesota, and now all of a sudden, like, all these corporations, even in England, now feel the need to message me to tell me that they like black people. It's like, well, I sort of assume, like, I've been buying my groceries from you for 20 years. I sort of assumed it was okay for me to shop here.
You're like,
and that I was
now
welcome.
you tell me?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. No, I don't like it at all. And I think it's very infantilizing as well.
Yeah.
And it doesn't do anything. It doesn't help anything, right? If you actually wanted to help people, like if you actually wanted to have like a real Black Lives Matter movement, which one could argue is actually quite necessary, certainly in the USA, then it wouldn't just be Black Lives Matter if they're killed in dubious circumstances by a white cop, which is basically what BLM is, right? It ignores the 99.9% of black deaths in America, and it just looks at that one specific thing, which is not, by the way, not even close to the top 10 things that are killing black people in this country, but it just totally focuses on that. Forget the fact that more non-black people, forget the fact that more white people are killed by police every year than black people in the USA. I mean, look, if you want to have a movement against police brutality, like, go and do that and make it that. But if you're going to have a movement, I think, called Black Lives Matter, then like, look at the top 10 things that are killing black people and let's tackle that. Let's talk about that. Let's open that. But then people don't even want to have that conversation. And that's why I'm just like, look, it's, nice name, but I'm not down with this because it's disingenuous and it's not actually helping people. Like, what good? No one's really been able to answer this question for me, because I can tell you what bad's come of it, but no one's really been able to tell me like what good has come out of the Black Lives Matter movement in the last 5 to 6 years. Like what tangible positive changes have happened that have made life better for black people in the USA or abroad. I can tell you ways it's made it worse, but what good has come from it? So you made some, white liberals on Twitter and Instagram feel good because they put it in their bio. Like, that's it. It hasn't helped any black person. In fact, more black people. What happened after George Floyd was killed? The riots and the protests. How many more black people were killed in the summer of 2020 during those riots? Over 10 of them. I think about 15 or so, right? Were directly killed, murdered. How many people lost their businesses or had their job, like their livelihoods wrecked, right? And no one cares. So one black guy dies. So cool. Let's kill another 15. Let's destroy another 100 people's business. Well done, guys. Well done. But you put the black square on Instagram, so you feel good. That's why it pisses me off. And I don't use that term often, but it pisses me off because I'm like, not only is this not doing any good, you're actually, and people don't care about the destruction, right? Because they care more about looking good than doing good. They haven't done anything good. You didn't create anything. You haven't actually done anything really with any of it, right? It hasn't done anything good. And you've also you've furthered racial tension as well. Right? Because what do people do? Big like time, they start, then they jump on and they start with the whole like, all white people are racist crap and whatever. And it's just like, dude, you're just raising the temperature rather than bringing it down, and people throw their little agendas in and they start trying to make it about this and that. Remember when they started with the whole Black trans lives matter? It's like, what are you even doing? Right? Did you see that? Right? Yeah, it's like, well, Black Lives Matter is not enough. Black trans lives matter. Like, what? Like, you're having a march for, it's so asinine. It's like everyone's got people have their thing and their agenda and they're, let's hijack this thing and turn it into a trans thing, right? And you're just like, what? Like, what's going on? And then you have the Asian Lives Matter thing, and that one's also different because I don't even know. Those ones even sort of clash because a lot of the Asian people who are getting like harmed or attacked like in big cities in the USA last year and beginning of this year, those acts were often committed by black people, which people don't like to talk about, but they're still there. Still there trying to blame it on white supremacy. And I'm just like, people are freaking clowns, man.
See, this is why I like you. I don't want to interview you. And I don't usually go there where we're going today. So this is good. Even I'm like, I don't know, should we be doing this? Which is good. I know we're on target, but this is the shit you're talking about, man. A lot of people are thinking this.
I know.
A lot of people are just normal people, dude. Like, you walk in the room, okay, I'm not blind. I know that you're a black guy and that it's quite possible and likely that your life has had some different shape or form and experience than mine because of the way people identify, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't look at you that way as a person, right? I'm not dumb. I'm not naive to think there isn't racism or something like that. But what is really infuriating is the media and these movements that are coming from God knows where that are pushing people into identity politics and all these micro identifications, right? It's like when I look at myself in the mirror, I see Luke, the soul behind my eyes, and I try to be as disidentified by the body as I can. I mean, I'm not perfect at it, right? I got to lose a couple pounds here and hairline's thinning, right? So I'm identified with the body and somewhat, I guess my personality, ego, intellect, but really like my goal is to go within to what I really am as a spirit. And so when I relate to other people, I see the surface because there might be relevant information that helps me relate and communicate with them.
You have eyes.
But I'm seeing that that's a living being behind that, right? And the more in touch I am with who and what I really am, the more easily I'm able to be in touch with who and what you really are, which is truly inclusive and truly tolerant and hopefully empathetic and compassionate and unconditionally loving.
Yes.
When I start to get caught up in my package, that doesn't sound right. When I get caught up in my package, nothing gets done. But, when I start looking at things so superficially and get caught up in, anyone's like sort of the minutia of their sexual preferences or the color of their hair or how they like to dress or the music they listen to or what country they're from or what language they speak. It's like, it's all a distraction. None of those things are actually the human being. And there's some bizarre agenda. I guess they call it cultural Marxism. I mean, there's kind of a history of this, but it seems like the agenda is to get people micro segregated into so many subgroups of ego identification that there's just rampant division. It's like not enough to just have like Latino, Asian, Black, white, you have all of these subgroups
intersectionality
that we didn't create.
Yes.
Like I don't think that way. I never created that. I don't have a bunch of categories to put myself in. So my question is always like, who the fuck is doing this? Where does this come from? Because I don't think human beings are inventing it themselves. Like these young kids that have, all of these, emojis and pronouns. I'm like, where are they actually getting all of this? And what's the agenda behind it? And the only thing I can boil it down to at a wild guess is that there is some sort of force that is desiring for people to become further disidentified from who they really are. Because within the true self is where the power lies. Like that's where your fire is, man, of just being a living, breathing man or woman, right? Like you're a sovereign being created by God.
You inadvertently just answered your own question.
Maybe I did. Sometimes I think I'm asking a question and then I'm just on a diatribe.
Well, you said that's where your power lies. And it's a power play. It's a power play. So the concepts primarily stem from academia and then it flows into politics and aspects of the media, but it's a power play. It's simple divide and conquer. It's nothing new, right? Identity politics is not you can pit people in groups, black versus white, men versus women, straight versus gay, vaccinated versus unvaccinated, mask versus no mask, red team versus blue team, liberal versus conservative, Democrat versus Republican. Anytime you can pit people against each other like that, it makes people more fragmented and easier to control. Right. Easier to control because they stay fighting each other instead of fighting any sort of actual power structure.
Right, because there is actually an intrinsic outside threat.
Exactly.
And we'll ignore that threat because I'm like caught up because you have a gray t-shirt on.
And I didn't respect your pronouns. So that's what it goes to. And what's interesting is that whole thing you were talking about before is if you push it to its natural conclusion, you actually end up back where people where our society has already learned this and thus based things correctly and legally off of it, which is that the individual is the ultimate minority, right? So if you go through, Zuby he's black, he's male, he's Nigerian and British and heterosexual and he's this, and he's that, and he's from this class. Like, ultimately, you just get down to Zuby is an individual. Zuby's an individual, right? You can't just say, oh, he's black and that other guy is black, so they share a similar story or way of thinking or character. No, right? That's actually where racism originally stemmed from the notion that, okay, you can just make this whole assumption about this group of people based off of a caricature or a stereotype or whatever. Black people are like X. And so therefore we can treat people different. White people do it now, right? That's why, now it's kind of hip to be, under the guise of anti-racism, there's a lot of anti-white racism now, right? You can now say things about white people, white men in particular, where if you were to say it about any other demographic, man, you'd lose your Twitter account in 2 seconds. Right?
It really hurts my feelings too.
Yeah, but this is the thing, right? So people are just inverting it, and this is what I mean by people sort of hiding behind their labels and their politics to be jerks, right? So suddenly, because you're an anti-racist and you have BLM in your bio, you can just go to town on white people now, right? You can just say whatever the heck you can say, the most egregious, disgusting stuff. Which, if you said about Jewish people, Black people, Asian people, anybody else, everyone would be like, "Nah, man, like, heck no," right? You'd sound like a complete psycho. And this is the thing, right? I'm very much an equalist, man. I'm just down to treating people equally, viewing people as individuals. Like you said, I don't care straight, gay, white, black, male, female, brown, Arab, atheist, theist. I treat people as individuals. And that's the best you can do. And that's how people should be treated under the law, which we finally worked out, which is great. And it's generally how people should be treated, Judge people by the content of the character, not the I think there was a famous guy who said that.
Yeah.
Right.
It's funny. I noticed when people started using that Martin Luther King quote, then, because it just says it all, right? I mean, like you just irrefutable, right? Yeah. And then all this kind of anti-Martin Luther King stuff started coming around. Oh, he was a misogynist and womanizer. Yeah. And I was like, oh, that's convenient, The guy that just squelched the whole idiocy of judging people based on externals, they're going to, and I don't know what his personal life was like, but I thought the timing of that was kind of funny. I'm like, really? You're going to like take that? But it's, it's like, I also see the same thing with a lot of Black conservatives, like someone like Candace Owens or something.
It's open season on us.
Like, you're not allowed to like step out of line and have your own point of view.
Nope. And that is racist.
That's super weird.
That is racist.
That's super weird.
Yeah. In fact, that's the most common form of racism I see in modern society.
Really?
Oh gosh, yeah. And I've been dealing with that people are finally starting to see it. It's been like that for decades. It's been like that for decades. It's just that people now, maybe with the advent of social media, if they're in certain circles, they can now see it, right? They can see that some of these, because the whole concept of racism is often in the mainstream. And I think this is partly brilliant branding, but it's considered like a right-wing phenomenon, right? Mm-hmm. Somehow totally. Like racism, there's always been this notion that, the left or, liberals are like, tolerant and anti-racism or whatever. And, those conservatives and right-wingers, like they just...
That's what I always thought until the last couple of years happened.
And maybe it was true in the 1950s, right? But like the proper demarcations of liberal and conservative. But anytime from, I don't know, man, certainly the 90s onwards, like it's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. I can honestly say, like, I don't deal with any sort of like racism that's actually like affects my life in any sort of tangible way. But in terms of like comments that I get that are racist, 90% of it comes from the left side of the political aisle. Vast majority of it, because they disagree with my politics. And if you disagree with, with the politics, then suddenly
open season.
Then it's open season, right? It's quite a remarkable phenomenon that people should be more aware of. People really should be more aware of, because, and it's even worse here in the USA, because in the US, it's literally assumed that, if you're Black, you're a Democrat, right? It's almost like it's almost like embedded in the thing, right? Like, it's just like, oh yeah, Black Americans vote Democrat. And, and there's truth to it. It's like 90% or something like that, right? But it's just assumed. And so someone who steps out of that, whether they're an independent or they're libertarian or they're Republican or whatever, the way that those people can be treated both by other Black people and by people of all different colors, et cetera, can be like very, very vicious, like very vicious, lots of name calling, like outright racism, stuff that just would not typically fly suddenly becomes okay. And I would think that's something people should be aware of and perhaps should talk about more. And that's not me be like playing any sort of, victim or saying I'm persecuted or whatever, right? It's just saying like, look, this is an observation. And
that's very, yeah.
And something I said on Rogan, which I'll repeat here, which is that I think when people's character really, really shows is actually how they treat people who they disagree with. That's what really, I think, shows somebody's character and kindness and how real and tolerant and inclusive and open to diversity, et cetera, they actually are. Because it's very easy to, okay, this person, agrees with me on 99% of things. Like it's easy to be tolerant of that person, right? Because they agree with you and, you kind of back each other up. But when you come across someone who you strongly, you disagree with, strongly on one issue or multiple things or whatever, if you suddenly think it's okay to, like I said before, wish harm or death upon that person or to just be really nasty and insulting or what, then you've revealed your true character. You've revealed your true character. Like, because tolerance isn't just tolerating people who agree with you. It's about the divergence. It's about people who don't agree with you and being able to go, you know what? I disagree. I can even strongly, really, really, really disagree with that person on that thing. But, I wish you all the best. I'm going to treat you like a human. I'm not going to denigrate you or like, hope that something bad happens to you or whatever. Maybe I hope you change your mind, right? That often happens. Maybe I hope you change your mind and you come more around to my way of thinking, but I'm not going to like bully you into it or threaten you into it or try to, hope all of that. So I think that's really, revealing. And I think with social media, it's interesting because that really gets revealed. You can really see how people treat people they disagree with, right? And you actually see even a lot of, celebrities or something, you see there's some nasty people out there, man. Like they're really, really nasty. And, again, they'll be doing it under the guise of, I'm virtuous and compassionate because I put he, him in my pronoun, in my profile.
My hate is coming from a place of compassion.
Exactly.
Therefore it's valid.
Yeah. So therefore it's valid. And I'm just like, man, well, to me, that's always the giveaway because that goes beyond the surface level. And it's like, okay, have someone disagree with this person and let's see, can you disagree and, have a hold a conversation and be civil and be respectful? Or is it suddenly like, the attacks come out and the denigration and the slander and, trying to, misrepresent the person or call them whatever name or whatever slur, all of that. So yeah.
A couple of days ago, I saw a headline from the Los Angeles Times about this guy, Larry Elder. I don't know if you're familiar with Larry Elder.
Yeah, I know Larry.
He's running for governor.
Mm-hmm.
And
blackface of white supremacy.
I think the blackface of white supremacy. I'm like, can a guy get a break? Dude. Like, honestly, man, like that guy's pretty damn wholesome. I mean, I've watched a lot of his stuff. He makes a lot of sense to me. I don't find anything extreme about him. Definitely have never had any indication that he, has any ill will toward his own people.
It's the perfect example of what I was just talking about.
Craziness, man.
Yeah, and it's also saying, get back in line, black man.
Right.
You're not allowed to think that way. You're thinking like a white person. Right? You're not allowed to have your own views. How dare you step out of line? And whoever wrote that headline, they're freaking racist. They probably don't even know it.
Yeah.
Right. They're thinking they're fighting against racism. But if you're there calling a black man the black face of white supremacy, you've lost me, man. Like you've literally, man, like that. There's so many layers to that. And I'm sure perhaps the person who wrote it doesn't even realize what they're projecting there.
Yeah. Well, God, we've covered a lot of shit today that I had no idea we were going to dig into. Thank you for humoring me and going in all of these divergent directions here.
It's all good, man.
I want to perhaps leave people. I don't feel like we've been too doomsday about things, but we're also talking about some real shit, and some of it is, maybe uncomfortable to look at for some people. So, being where we are in the world right now as a species of humans, what would you say is the way forward? Like there's so many things beyond our control. What can we do to have a positive impact and to bring people together and, erase some of the division that I think is largely being hoisted upon us, right? It's not like it's happening because of us, maybe human nature, but the media narratives and all of these things that are causing this division. I heard you talk about this the other night, and it really spoke to me. Is that we need to, and it's kind of related to what you just said, we need to really embrace those people we disagree with because, I think fundamentally all of humanity is for humanity, regardless of what our particular positions are on a medication or public policy and things like that. So, how can we find our voice and be a force for good in the world and close that gap that we're finding between us?
Yeah, well, I think everything helps with working on yourself, right? Becoming physically, mentally stronger, building yourself up spiritually, emotionally, etc. Because once you do that, you just become a much more powerful force in general. And you become someone people respect, people listen to, and you become more of an authority. And you also are in a stronger position. And when you're in a strong position, you're less likely to, by definition, operate from a position of weakness, right? Oftentimes people promoting authoritarianism, you've probably seen this. It tends to be weak people.
Absolutely.
Weak people lean towards authoritarianism, telling people what to do, and trying to use the force of the state, something more powerful than them, to get other people to do it, right? They themselves can't, force me to do jack, right? But then they'll try to use, if they can't bully you directly, they'll do it in that roundabout manner. So make yourself stronger. And then beyond that is, I think being aware of the divide and conquer narrative protects you a lot from it. If you are aware that, okay, this is what the powers that be do, they're going to try to turn friend against friend, neighbor against neighbor, family against family. They're going to try to create these rifts along racial lines or along, like medical lines now. Political lines, religious lines, like they have different ways to do it, right? Find the wedge, take the wedge, find the gap and drive it in there. So if you're aware and cognizant of that, then it protects you a lot because you can kind of see what's coming. And when they're doing it, you can be like, look, I'm not going to fall for that, right? When they're there on the TV saying like, there's a pandemic of the unvaccinated or, unvaccinated people, right? You're aware that, okay, this is, firstly, turn the TV off. But if you're going to watch it, be aware that they're trying to sell you a particular narrative, just like they sold people on the, everyone who voted Brexit is racist, everyone who voted Trump is racist, blah, blah, blah. Like they're trying to drive that wedge because it creates more power from them. And then just to not fall for it. Don't fall for it, right? Don't lose friends because you have a disagreement on something. Like talk to people, show true empathy and true compassion. If you find someone who you don't agree with or you don't understand their perspective, right? You don't know why they, that you just don't understand their position, listen to them, talk to them. Even if you think they're like, crazy or whatever, like hear out their perspective, which can be hard. It can be hard. You might have to grit your teeth and be like, right. But hear out their perspective. Yeah. And then once you do, then you can bring your own. And even if you end up disagreeing, you will at least create that empathy. Because at the moment, a lot of false binaries are being created, right? So a great example of a false binary that's very relevant is they're trying to make it seem like everybody is either pro-vax or anti-vax. Right? So all of a sudden, people who never in our lives had been called anti-vax before, you're suddenly being anti-vax, anti-vaxxer, anti-vaxxer, right? Anti-vaxxer actually means somebody who is like totally against vaccines, period. Right? Just like an ethical vegan is against meat. Like there are no vaccines. I don't want them. I don't like, right? Someone who doesn't want a particular vaccine out of the hundreds available is not an anti-vaxxer. Or someone who simply thinks people should be free to choose whether or not they take it. That's not an anti-vaxxer, but they're trying to make it either you're pro and thus you're even in favor of it being mandatory, or you're anti, right? And that's a totally false dichotomy.
It's a great distinction.
Right? It's a totally false dichotomy that's been created. Just like they tried to do this thing with the anti-racist thing. If you look into the anti-racism philosophy, the notion is that everyone is either anti-racist or racist. It's a false dichotomy. So if you're not on board with Robin DiAngelo and Ibram Kendi and being actively anti-racist, not just not racist, then you are complicit in a racist system and are therefore racist.
Wow.
It's, right? That's the philosophy behind it.
Yeah.
So everyone is either an anti-racist or racist, as if there's no huge middle ground here of just not being racist. Right?
That's very unproductive.
Exactly. And so it's all, yeah. So what did they say? Was it males who said,
oh man,
tyranny is the deliberate removal of nuance. And that's what's happening, right? So nuance is being deliberately removed. And once that happens, people fall into these factions and it just becomes this us versus them thing. And people also make assumptions about people's views, which are wholly incorrect, right? There's so many people, every day I get people on social media who literally project things that apparently they think I believe that I don't believe. I've never said, I've never claimed, etc. But all of a sudden it's being, they've kind of thrown me in that box. And so it's just that. So there's a lot of nuance to all of this, and it can be difficult to do online, but certainly in the real world, when you talk to people and you can see them face to face and have a more nuanced, longer conversation, then it helps to do that. And it creates empathy, because then at least you can understand the other side. You can understand other people's positions. People have different experiences as well. There might be somebody who knows, I don't know, somebody's dad died of COVID, right? There's a good chance that person will be more afraid of the virus itself than somebody who doesn't know anybody who's died of it. Maybe they don't even know anyone who's caught it, or if they did, it was like a mild cold or whatever. So that's anecdotal, but it still has an impact. Just like somebody who, we are emotional creatures too. So understand that. And there's a balance between, I'm very much like a facts guy. Like, give me the facts, right? Facts and data. But I do understand that someone's personal experience or the experience of someone close to them can also skew their perspective to the point where the facts kind of land a little bit flat on them. So again, if both people can be compassionate and empathetic, then you can help people to navigate that. And I think that's where you get that unity, you get the proper compassion, and it's not just like a fight all the time.
Agree to disagree.
Yeah.
Sometimes like that's your common ground. It's just like, oh, this is great. We share something. We don't agree. You don't agree with me. Yeah. I don't agree with you. We have that in common. Cool. Yeah. That might be the only thing we agree on, but it's pretty solid.
It's being an adult as well. Like there's no two people in the world who agree on absolutely everything. There just aren't. Like if you get into the nitty gritty, like you'll have general people you generally agree with. If you go into super detail, like on every, we all have disagreements, man.
Yeah.
So it's just part of life. It's part of being an adult. We all have to live in the same society and function and not kill each other. So let's do it.
Yeah, man. Last question for you. Who have been 3 teachers or teachings that have influenced your life and your work that you could share with us?
My dad, my mom, and Jesus Christ.
Wow, you were the fastest out of all my guests. Usually people are like, oh man, what? Oh, that's a tough one. They get all befuddled. I mean, that's good. Tell us about your new album.
Word of Zuby. So it's out now. It is my 6th album, my 9th release in total. It's my most personal and provocative work to date. Touches on, honestly, it touches on more socio-political and cultural issues than any of my previous albums, but it's also very positive and inspirational and motivational. I'm not just like preaching and beating people over the head with super strong messaging. It's a very enjoyable album. The beats are really dope. Got producers on there from all over the world. Got some great collaborations with both British and American artists. And go listen to it. I'm very, very proud of this album.
I'm gonna be honest with you. And anyone that knows me knows this. I don't like rap music.
Okay.
There was a period like in the beginning of the 90s when NWA came out, and I got Straight Outta Compton on vinyl. And I loved that album,
nice.
Man. I was super into it. But that's like the only rap I've ever really listened to. I mean, I don't still, but there was a moment there. But I listened to your album because because I follow your work, and I was like, oh, what's this guy up to? And it's really good, dude. It's really good. So I want to encourage people to,
please give it a shot. Even if you're someone who doesn't typically listen to rap, give it a shot, because a lot of people don't like rap partly because of the messaging.
Well, that's kind of been my thing, you know. I'm just like, dude, I don't need more negativity in my head. I'm trying to like detox negativity, right? I mean, it's just like I don't listen to like thrash metal or like satanic death metal. You know, it's just not my energy. And that's kind of the thing. Like, I don't mind a beat and like someone rapping. It's just like the content of the lyrics. I think that's why when I listened to yours, I was like, oh, this is actually dope. Yeah. It's basically, I mean, I only heard a couple tracks, but it's like the conversation we just had that rhymes and is in the flow. You know what I mean? So I was like, cool. Like I can get behind this.
I once had someone, last year, someone said that my music is like, I think they were trying to diss me. It wasn't a fan, but they said like they said that one of my songs sounds like a stream of tweets or something like that. And I think they said it as a diss, but I was like, man, my tweets are dope. Like, you're actually pretty accurate. Like, that's kind of how I rap. It's actually why I like Twitter, because it's kind of like rapping, but without rhyming.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It is, man. Well, thank you so much for coming on. So you got a podcast too. Give us your website, social media, all that stuff. For people
sure.
That want to follow you.
You can follow me on all social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube at Zuby Music. That's ZUBY Music. And if you go to zubymusic.com, you'll find links to everything on there. My music, my merchandise, my podcast, zubymusic.com. You'll find it all there.
Cool. Very prolific, man. You got the book, you got all these things. So thanks, man. Thanks for coming through Texas. Welcome. Welcome to the States. Enjoy your trip. And it's been a real pleasure to hang out with you today.
Pleasure, Luke. Appreciate it.